The liaison officer received the order to take a prisoner, but never received the prisoner's full file. The only clean line on the page was a name, Drechsler, and a basic label, German submarine sailor. With the truck already on the road, the liaison officer signed the intake anyway, because the schedule did not wait for missing pages. The transport truck rolled through the gate of Papago Park and stopped on packed dirt. The guard, the man who controlled the gate chain right now and wanted the line moving, opened the back and counted bodies. The recorder, the person who controlled the paper trail right now and wanted clean boxes checked, stepped up with a clipboard and read names straight from the sheet. Drechsler stepped down last. On paper, Drechsler was just another German submarine sailor. In reality, Drechsler had been used as an informant among other prisoners, and Drechsler needed one thing right now: to get through intake without a single man in this camp recognizing the face. The recorder read the name. Drechsler answered without looking up. The guard pointed Drechsler toward the yard and the barracks. The liaison officer watched for disorder and saw none. Men shuffled. Men stared. Men waited. The routine looked clean. A laugh cut through the prisoner line, low and quick. It did not come from the guards. It came from a prisoner who had stopped pretending not to know. The ringleader prisoner stood a few places back. The ringleader prisoner, a German submarine sailor who controlled fear inside the camp and wanted Drechsler dead before night, stared at Drechsler's profile as if matching a face to a private list. The ringleader prisoner did not step forward. The ringleader prisoner turned slightly and spoke a short phrase to the man beside him. The phrase was quiet. It did not need to be loud. The guard marched Drechsler across the yard. Drechsler kept eyes low and hands open. Drechsler measured distance to the office door and distance to the nearest guard the way a man measures exits. At Fort Hunt, Drechsler had learned what recognition meant. The United States Navy intelligence system had pulled Drechsler into a small room and told Drechsler to listen. Not like a prisoner, but like a friend. Drechsler had been placed among newly arrived prisoners under more than one false name. Drechsler had asked simple questions that sounded like boredom. Men had answered because they wanted to talk. Those answers had become maps and warnings and intercepted patterns. Each time Drechsler did the work, Drechsler bought another day of protection from the people holding the keys. Each time Drechsler did the work, Drechsler also wrote a sentence inside the German ranks that could only end one way. Now Drechsler was inside a camp heavy with submarine sailors. The system that had used Drechsler had delivered Drechsler back to the men most able to identify the trick. Inside the barracks, Drechsler went straight to an open bunk at the end of a row. Drechsler sat. Drechsler tried to make the body small. Drechsler tried to become another tired man waiting for a meal. A prisoner walked past and brushed the edge of Drechsler's blanket. The touch was light, but it was not an accident. The prisoner leaned close as if whispering a joke and said a different name, a name Drechsler had answered to once while working for the United States. Drechsler did not answer. Drechsler did not look up. The silence was the confirmation. The ringleader prisoner used routine like cover. A man went to the wash area and did not wash. A man went to the mess line early and came back with nothing. A man stood near the door and watched who spoke to guards. The barracks looked normal from the outside. Underneath, the camp was building a circle. Drechsler left the barracks and walked to the office door. Drechsler kept the request short because open words were dangerous. The duty officer sat behind a desk with a logbook. The duty officer, responsible for the next hours of order and wanting a quiet shift, looked up and saw only a prisoner causing friction on the first day. The duty officer told Drechsler to return to the barracks and follow the schedule. The duty officer said issues could be handled after evening count. Drechsler did not argue. Drechsler understood what the duty officer had not grasped. Evening count was a promise built for ordinary problems. Drechsler's threat was measured in minutes. Drechsler walked back through the yard and stayed in open sight. Drechsler slowed near a guard and asked for reassignment to a different barracks. The guard, the man who controlled movement right now and wanted no complication, shook his head and pointed Drechsler onward. The guard wanted the yard smooth. The guard did not know Drechsler was asking for distance from a sentence already being carried. Late afternoon brought the supper movement. Lines formed. Guards watched the fence and the gate. A sentry on an outer post watched outward, not inward. In the middle, bodies drifted and blocked and guided. 2 prisoners closed on Drechsler near the corridor leading to the wash area. The prisoners did not hit in the open. The prisoners used shoulders and hips and the press of traffic. Drechsler tried to turn toward the yard. A shoulder blocked. Drechsler tried to step back toward the barracks. A body filled the path. Drechsler looked down the corridor and saw the ringleader prisoner standing at the far end, not touching, controlling. The ringleader prisoner's face stayed calm. The ringleader prisoner did not need to run. The corridor would do the work. Drechsler shifted left, then right. The movement did not matter. The corridor took Drechsler the way a current takes a man who cannot swim. In the wash area, damp air clung to tile and carried sound. Prisoners formed a loose wall that kept the doorway open enough to look normal from outside, but closed enough to trap a man inside. The ringleader prisoner stepped forward and spoke once. The ringleader prisoner called Drechsler a traitor. The ringleader prisoner said the camp would enforce German military law. The ringleader prisoner said the act was duty, not murder. The words were aimed at the men watching from the edges as much as at Drechsler. The message was simple. Anyone who interfered would be marked. Drechsler tried to speak to the watchers, not to the ringleader prisoner. Drechsler tried to make the danger concrete. Drechsler tried to point toward the office and the guards and the fence. Drechsler tried to trade information for time. The wall did not move. Hands grabbed Drechsler's arms. A blow landed. Drechsler fell against tile. Drechsler tried to stand and was driven down. The ringleader prisoner did not strike. The ringleader prisoner kept distance and kept control. The ringleader prisoner made sure others did the work. Later, the description that survived was blunt. Drechsler was severely beaten and left hanging in the shower room. The men who did it left in pairs and singles. Collars were straightened. Sleeves were pulled down. Faces returned to blank. The wash area returned to ordinary quiet, the kind that hides what happened 5 minutes earlier. A guard found Drechsler and froze for a heartbeat. The guard saw bruising and blood and the posture of death. The guard shouted for the duty officer and blew a whistle that changed the whole camp in seconds. The duty officer arrived, looked once, and made a decision that locked the next months into place. The duty officer could have called it a prisoner fight and tried to bury it. The duty officer called it murder. The liaison officer came fast. The liaison officer saw the body and understood what the body meant. This was not a sudden brawl. This was a system inside the barracks enforcing its own terror. The liaison officer ordered lockdown. Guards shut doors. Guards moved sentries to watch inward as well as outward. The recorder started pulling rosters and count sheets and writing names. The analyst, the person who turned small facts into a usable case and wanted a court-ready chain, began listing who had been near the wash corridor, who had left the barracks at the wrong time, and who had suddenly shifted bunks. The camp went quiet, but it was not calm. Drechsler was dead. A message had been sent. The liaison officer looked at the locked yard and understood the next fight would not be with fists. The next fight would be against silence. The lockdown held through the night. At dawn, the yard moved under command. Guards watched inward. In the barracks, the ringleader prisoner, the German submarine sailor who controlled fear and wanted nobody to speak, kept the same message alive. Nobody saw, nobody heard, nobody speaks. The liaison officer, responsible for the investigation chain and wanting proof that could stand in court, opened Drechsler's file and found the same emptiness that had brought Drechsler here. A name, a basic label, a dead man in a shower room. Before breakfast, the liaison officer broke the camp's habits. Barracks groups were split into smaller blocks. Work details were reassigned. The wash corridor went under constant watch. Guards moved men out of familiar rows and into unfamiliar rooms, 2 at a time, with no warning. Comfort dropped. The ringleader prisoner's reach dropped with it. The recorder fixed each move on paper and wanted every time locked in ink. The analyst pinned count sheets from the night of the killing beside the new roster and wanted one mismatch that could be proven. The analyst marked who traveled together, who always ate together, and who always positioned near the wash corridor when guards looked away. Interview started and hit the wall. Each prisoner chose the same safe places: mess line, bunk, latrine. Each prisoner said Drechsler went alone. Each prisoner said Drechsler did it to himself. The liaison officer ran 10 interviews and heard the same phrases return in the same order. The recorder's pages made the pattern visible. The liaison officer had the recorder read the denials back, slow and exact. The words sounded rehearsed, like a drill, not like memory. The room went tight each time the same sentence came out of a new mouth. The liaison officer changed the method. The liaison officer interviewed men who had been separated an hour earlier, then asked the same questions in a different order. The recorder fixed the words. The analyst compared times and phrases. A crack appeared in the paper, not in the mouth. One prisoner claimed to be on the far side of the yard when supper lines formed. A guard note on the count sheet placed that prisoner inside the barracks at the same minute. The liaison officer brought the prisoner back, set the sheet on the table, and tapped the circled line once. The prisoner repeated the denial. The liaison officer ended the interview and moved the prisoner into a separate room away from the old barracks. A guard stayed at the door. The liaison officer called it protection because a witness who lived could speak again. The camp answered fast. By noon, the guard reported a message passed in the yard, quiet and confident. The message promised the same end for any man who helped the Americans. The liaison officer did not answer with threats. The liaison officer answered with distance. The liaison officer moved the separated prisoner again, changed the route, and rotated guards so no pattern formed. The ringleader prisoner could not put hands on what the ringleader prisoner could not locate. In the afternoon, the prisoner returned to the table with a different posture. The liaison officer asked about the wash corridor. The prisoner said the corridor had been held. The prisoner said 2 men had been told to keep the doorway clear. The prisoner said the order came from the ringleader prisoner. The liaison officer did not stop at one statement. The liaison officer pulled in a corridor watcher. The watcher denied everything. The liaison officer presented the watcher with the corridor description without naming the source. The watcher denied again, then asked how the Americans knew the doorway positions. That question gave the liaison officer the next step. The liaison officer pressed once. The watcher said the watcher had stood there. The watcher said the watcher had not struck Drechsler. The watcher said the camp was enforcing German military law and refusing the order would mark a man as a traitor too. The liaison officer wrote the point into the file. German military law was being used as the banner. The banner explained why the barracks moved as one body and why the wall held. The liaison officer widened the net with the same tool: separation. 2 men who had been close to the ringleader prisoner were moved to different blocks. A 3rd man was pulled off a work detail and placed under watch. The men tried to hold the old line, but the line no longer reached across rooms. The recorder's pages began to show small differences, then larger ones. That evening, the liaison officer brought in the ringleader prisoner. The ringleader prisoner entered calm and sat as if the room belonged to the ringleader prisoner. The liaison officer asked where the ringleader prisoner had been during supper movement. The ringleader prisoner said the barracks. The liaison officer placed a roster note on the table showing the ringleader prisoner's bunk empty during the same minute. The ringleader prisoner called the note a lie. The liaison officer asked about German military law. The ringleader prisoner smiled once and said the camp did not need American permission to keep honor. The ringleader prisoner said Drechsler deserved what happened. The ringleader prisoner said any man who sold comrades deserved death. The recorder wrote those sentences down and read the sentences back, slow and exact. The ringleader prisoner stopped smiling. The liaison officer ended the interview and ordered the ringleader prisoner held apart from the barracks. Guards moved the ringleader prisoner out of sight. The barracks lost the visible center that had held the silence together. The next morning, the barracks tried to test the new order. A man refused a work assignment. Another man tried to pass a message along a fence line. Guards stopped both moves and logged both names. The liaison officer kept the response narrow and procedural. The liaison officer punished only the act because the goal was a case, not a riot. Over the next days, the liaison officer pulled only what could be fixed to paper. 1 man admitted to holding the wash door. 1 man admitted to standing watch in the corridor. One man admitted to hearing the words German military law spoken as a command. Each admission narrowed the circle into a set that could be named. When the file was thick enough, the liaison officer carried it to the clerk. The clerk, responsible for the charging step and wanting the format correct, checked dates and locations, then began to write charges in clean language: murder, conspiracy, and participation. By the time the clerk finished, the ringleader prisoner no longer controlled the story inside the fence. The ringleader prisoner had a new fight ahead, and the fight would be in a courtroom where silence could not erase paper. Charges were filed, and the paper moved faster than any rumor in the barracks. Before sunrise, guards pulled the ringleader prisoner out of the main block and kept the ringleader prisoner out of reach of the old circle. The move was quiet, but the result was loud. The barracks lost the one voice that could lock mouths on command. The ringleader prisoner tried to rebuild control anyway. A message was passed at the waterline. A second message was passed at the mess line. Guards intercepted both. Guards did not argue. Guards logged names, changed routes, and kept the ringleader prisoner blind to where witnesses slept. That morning, the hearing room was set. The judge took the seat. The prosecutor opened the file. The defense counsel leaned in close to the accused. The fence still held outside, but the fight had shifted. It was no longer fists in a wash corridor. It was authority inside a prisoner camp. The prosecutor started with the simplest chain. Drechsler arrived alive. Drechsler was driven into the wash area by coordinated pressure. Drechsler was severely beaten and left hanging in the shower room. The prosecutor said the killing was not a sudden brawl. The prosecutor said the killing had planning, control points, and a command voice behind it. The defense counsel answered with the story the barracks had used as cover. The defense counsel said Drechsler was a traitor. The defense counsel said German military law demanded punishment for betrayal. The defense counsel said the accused acted as soldiers, not as criminals. The defense counsel added a second claim. The defense counsel said the act was self-defense for the camp because an informant threatened everyone. The judge did not argue with emotion. The judge asked one question that forced the issue into the open. Who had the right to judge and punish inside this fence? The defense counsel said the accused remained German soldiers in captivity. The defense counsel said German military law still governed German soldiers. The defense counsel said honor did not stop at a fence. The prosecutor answered with boundaries, not speeches. The prosecutor said the fence was not German territory. The prosecutor said the camp existed under the authority of the United States. The prosecutor said prisoners were protected under the Geneva Convention of 1929. The prosecutor said captivity did not give prisoners a court. The prosecutor said captivity did not give prisoners a gallows. The judge ruled in plain terms. German military law could not operate as a court inside this camp. The case would proceed as murder under military justice. The defense counsel had lost the first shield, the shield of legitimacy. After the ruling, the courtroom turned from argument to proof. The prosecutor did not ask the judge to guess. The prosecutor built a chain one link at a time. A corridor watcher testified first. The corridor watcher admitted standing near the wash doorway during the supper movement. The corridor watcher admitted receiving a simple instruction: keep the doorway clear. A second prisoner testified next. The second prisoner admitted moving bodies in the yard, so Drechsler could not turn back. The second prisoner did not claim to strike Drechsler. The second prisoner claimed the second prisoner was only helping the flow. The prosecutor forced the point. Helping the flow was how the trap worked. The defense counsel attacked each witness with the same wedge. The defense counsel said the witnesses feared punishment from guards. The defense counsel said the witnesses were lying to save themselves. The defense counsel said memories were poisoned by lockdown and rumor. The prosecutor answered with paper. The recorder's pages fixed the first statements before the witness could hear a new story. Count sheets fixed positions during the supper movement. Guard logs fixed who was moved, when, and why. The analyst's notes fixed who traveled together and who shifted bunks right after Drechsler died. The prosecutor used those facts like nails. Each witness could bend, but the paper did not bend. Then the prosecutor turned to the banner behind the act. The prosecutor said the phrase German military law had not appeared by accident. The prosecutor said the phrase had been used as a command inside the barracks. The prosecutor said the phrase had been used to threaten anyone who might speak. The defense counsel denied command. The defense counsel said it was only angry talk. The defense counsel said the camp was full of men who spoke hard words and did not act on them. Don Moore. The prosecutor answered with the ringleader prisoner's own recorded words. The ringleader prisoner had said Drechsler deserved death. The ringleader prisoner had said the camp did not need American permission to keep honor. The recorder had written those sentences down. Those sentences now sat in the courtroom as evidence of intent. The defense counsel tried one last shift. The defense counsel said the United States had failed first. The defense counsel said the United States had placed Drechsler among submarine sailors. The defense counsel said the prisoners reacted to danger created by American error. The defense counsel said the camp was defending itself. The judge treated the American failure as real and separate. The judge treated the killing as real and separate. A management mistake did not authorize murder. Fear did not authorize murder. A claimed code did not authorize murder. The prosecutor pressed the point that mattered beyond this room. If the court accepted the defense story, every barracks could form a private court. Every prisoner who cooperated with guards could be hunted. Every camp with a hard faction would become a killing ground. The prosecutor said the fence would become decoration. The defense counsel raised the other fear, the fear outside the fence. The defense counsel warned of retaliation against captured Americans overseas. The defense counsel said executions would be heard and answered. The judge acknowledged the risk and refused to let the risk rule the verdict. The judge said trading justice for quiet would invite more violence, not less. The judge said the court would decide by evidence and authority, not by threats made in the dark. The verdict came in clear terms. The ringleader prisoner was found guilty. Other accused tied to the corridor trap and the coordinated assault were found guilty. Responsibility was assigned in layers. Command, coordination, and participation were treated as acts, not as passive presence. Sentence followed verdict. Death was ordered. The judge did not call it revenge. The judge called it enforcement of control inside the fence. The judge said the camp could not allow terror to claim the right to judge and kill. Word moved through Papago Park within hours. The barracks went quiet in a different way. The old circle tested the fence with small disobedience. Guards answered fast and procedural. No speeches, no bargaining. The ringleader prisoner no longer spoke to crowds. The ringleader prisoner spoke through paperwork. The case did not end with sentence. Higher command reviewed the outcome. Questions came back to the liaison officer about timing, optics, and retaliation. The liaison officer answered with one blunt point. If the United States allowed a prisoner faction to execute a man by intimidation, the United States would lose control of every camp that held men with a private chain of command. While the review ran, the liaison officer fixed the failure that had delivered Drechsler. Transfer packets were tightened. Warnings were written in plain language and placed where intake could not miss them. Housing became a security decision, not a bed decision. Guards were trained to watch inward pressure, not only outward escape. None of that brought Drechsler back. All of it was meant to stop the next rope. Delay carried its own danger. A sentence never carried out would become a message, too. The liaison officer watched the calendar and watched the barracks for signs that the old story might return. The execution order arrived. On August 25, 1945, at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas, 7 convicted German prisoners were hanged under United States military authority. The process was controlled, witnessed, and recorded. No crowd, no barracks, no honor court, only the detaining power's law. Papago Park returned to routine. Guards walked posts, lines formed, men ate, the fence stood. Years later, many people remembered a tunnel and an escape. Fewer people remembered a shower room and a murder. The liaison officer did not chase every story. The liaison officer cared about one result that could not be argued away. Inside the fence, terror tried to become law. The fence held because the law held.